Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing, a weekly podcast where we stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, helping you get the best results from your marketing efforts. Now let's join our hosts, Paul Avery and Martin Broadhurst.
Hello, and welcome again to another episode of Artificially Intelligent Marketing with me, Paul Avery, and the fantastic, wondrous Martin Broadhurst. Hello, Martin. How are you?
I'm great, Paul. I'm cold, but ready for Christmas.
Yeah, 1 week to go, so it's crept up quickly. We've been getting a few Christmas presents on the old AI front, haven't we, over the last couple of weeks? There's a few things we're going to cover on today's podcast. We're obviously going to need to talk about the launch of GPT 5.2, Sam Altman's Code Red, and crumbs, Gemini's awesome, and Opus 4.5 is awesome, and people don't think we're relevant anymore. We better get something cool out. So we'll talk about how cool that is or isn't. We're going to talk a little bit more about AIO, AEO, GEO, whatever you want to call it, and whether or not it's actually just SEO. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast previously, but we've got some interesting new takes to go over. And OpenAI also released a report about their how people use the enterprise level product with some really interesting take homes on whether people are getting value from using AI. Obviously, we have to think about what the mouthpiece is. OpenAI telling us that people get use out of products like OpenAI's, but there's some interesting stuff there. So, Martin, let's jump into our first story and let's talk about OpenAI's launch of GPT 5.2. Some quite interesting stuff around that this week. You know, beyond just 5.2, they've had an interesting week.
Yeah, they have, and it all comes off the back of Google launching Gemini 3 Pro and Anthropic launching the Claude Opus 4.5, both of which showed some amazing scores in the evaluations, all of the benchmarks that we've come to look at, the tables with the little numbers, and we cross-reference them all and see who's number one for the various different categories. And what it showed was that OpenAI with ChatGPT or GPT 5.1 had started to slip down the pecking order quite substantially. So there was talk of a internal code red memo from Sam Altman, which was basically they need to focus on getting the models out that they've got behind closed doors to start competing and show that they're still in the race and they're not being left behind, which is interesting because the story before Google Gemini 3 came out was that they were preparing in OpenAI to launch ads within ChatGPT, and that was the next big thing. And all of a sudden, it's all hands on deck to improve the models, and the ad product is being pushed back in terms of its launch. We shall see what happens with that. So yeah, the new model 5.2 boasts significant improvements in reasoning and in long context understanding. In fact, I think the context window has been increased up to 400,000 tokens. So that's going to be in the region of 300,000 words, which is a substantial corpus of text. OpenAI claim it achieves 70% parity with human experts on certain benchmarks. So yeah, this is it's a big deal. I believe computer use and agentic use cases is something that they've particularly got their eye on as well.
I want to double click on a couple of things there, Martin. I think you make a really good point about the ads product being delayed. I remember seeing something floating about on the Reddit sphere. I think it was or Twitter. It was whatever we have to call these things now. There was a post from, I think it was one of the product leads. It wasn't Sam Altman. It was one of the product leads about pulling some of the initial tests, which, oh, by the way, weren't the ad product. There was something else, but that people had grumbled about a bit. And I think it's quite an interesting scenario where OpenAI have sort of been in the lead most of the way. But obviously GPT-5 has been a little bit of a letdown, I think, for users. The way it was launched kind of sucked as well. And now Gemini 3 comes in, Opus 4.5 come in, they're all kind of cool. One thing we know is once you introduce advertising into a product, you are sacrificing user experience in general, at least for what we have come to understand as advertising supported products. We talked about this a bit on our previous episode. So on the one hand, our model's no longer the top model. Oh, and by the way, we're about to introduce something where we'll make some more money, but users might like it much less. So I don't think it's a surprise that they cancelled the one that would make usability worse and then tried to roll out a model to stay on top. The other thing that's been quite interesting on the Reddit sphere is quite a few people wonder how much of the benchmark scores for GPT 5.2 is OpenAI kind of fiddling with their models and making sure that they're good at benchmarks rather than necessarily, real human use cases, which of course is very hard for us to tell. But some of the benchmark scores are significantly better than other models, including big jump on the ARC-AGI 2 benchmark up to 53%, give or take, and the best so far was 37.6 from Claude Opus. So that's a big leap. One of the math benchmarks it got 100% on, which is pretty significant. Although the other models were in the mid to high 90s as well. So is it really, really, really good, or did they just beat the benchmarks by playing a game? Who knows? But if you do a search for GPT 5.2 on Reddit, some of the post titles that you'll come up with are quite interesting. So GPT 5.2 extended thinking fails miserably and performs far worse than previous models. Simple bench for GPT 5.2 and 5.2 Pro. They both scored worse than their original GPT-5 counterparts. So hallucination rate, some people are reporting, is also up. I can't think of a time, especially in this race, when anybody rushing out a product that might not have been quite ready has gone that well. And because we have an enterprise level account, I can't play with 5.2 yet because it's not been rolled out to enterprise. So I can't test it for my usual real work benchmarks, if you like. But yeah, maybe it's not been a great move. I mean, you've been using it. What's your experience has been?
Really hard to give any real insight just because my use case in the chat window is kind of saturated. I'm not pushing these models to the edge of the frontier in terms of maths and science discovery. I'm using it for fairly routine, fairly mundane productivity type tasks, and it's fine. Just like the other model was fine. And I haven't noticed any significant improvement or decline either way. I think where these things start to matter is right at the frontier edge cases. I also think in terms of the metrics that really matter, OpenAI, of course, will be looking at one particular metric, which is the number of active users in the app. And it was reported by some outlets that they've seen a decline in 6% in active users on ChatGPT, which, in terms of alarm bells ringing, when you see Gemini users increasing and yours are declining by 6%, that is going to have some of the executives at OpenAI a little worried.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was an interview with Dario Amodei of Anthropic that I watched on YouTube. I think it was like some sort of maybe like New York Times in real world in life event. And he really leaned into the concept that their target market is enterprise, right? If that was their strategy, they're now very speaking about it very openly. I think other people have also commented on it being a great strategy. And so it's quite maybe helpful to own that if other people say, how smart of you? And really talked about the likes of OpenAI, didn't name any competitors, but being more consumer focused, which is, I think, interesting. One of the other things we saw this week was this partnership with Disney, where I think they basically, it's not cash, is it? I think they effectively have made a $1 billion investment in OpenAI and also granted OpenAI the IP rights to use Disney characters in Sora generated videos, which is extremely consumer faced, right? That's not really an enterprise use. So it's kind of interesting because that on the one hand, that's quite a big vote of confidence. And it does seem like Sam and the team have been out pressing the flesh and securing lots of different types of deals for hardware and building these massive server farms and now in with Disney, and maybe their business models are starting to separate actually a little bit. But you know, under those conditions, that 6% drop could be consumers moving to Gemini 3 because of Nano Banana, the image generation model. Yeah, I can see where there's been a little bit of panicky over at OpenAI after winning for quite a few years of this race. I mean, it hasn't been going very long, but this feels like their first we're in trouble moment from a competitor product being better than theirs standpoint, or at least maybe becoming more popular.
Yeah, Gemini also has that distribution right through the Android platform. I was speaking to my dad the other day and said, "Oh, have you used AI?" And I was just about to say, "Go and sign up to ChatGPT." And I remembered he's a Samsung user. Just get the app. You can open the app, and because he's logged into the whole Google ecosystem, it's just there. It kind of works and it saves the history. You have the same experience with ChatGPT, and people have got to sign up for an account if they want the history, all of that. So that kind of frictionless UX on the consumer side for Gemini is a big win as well. Just one more thing on the business model take as well. I watched an interview this week with the CEO of Mistral AI, the French large language model producer, and they were talking about how they're approaching the market. And they have very much gone on, yes, we've got product in terms of we've got these open source models that are for open source. They are frontier and state of the art in domains, but also they are going in as a solutions provider. So they are very much positioning themselves as, look, we recognize that at the enterprise level, you need on-prem models. You can't have your data going into the cloud, or trying to get the models to work to your use case is very hard. We've got the specialists and the expertise to implement and deploy that for you. And they're getting some really big ticket customers. They recently signed a deal with HSBC to be their large language model and AI solutions provider of choice. And that works across a bunch of other industries as well, with similarly, blue chip companies joining them. So again, a different business model, a different approach. Few people are looking at Mistral to the state of the art frontier models, but are they making models and making it such that they can be applied in real world enterprise? Yes, they are. And they seem to be betting big on that.
Yeah, there's definitely some fragmentation is probably too strong, but there are subsets of the market that companies can put themselves in a better position to serve for a lot of the reasons you just said. There's an interesting, it's a bit of a tangent, and it only happened today, so I haven't had a chance to play with it, but Gemini also now has like a new native audio model built into it, which in theory should mean it's better at listening and speaking. And as part of that, they've rolled out the translation capabilities to any Bluetooth earphones. So it used to be you could only do this on like Google's earphones. But yes, so now you can go on holiday, and if you've got your earphones in and you've got a phone with Gemini on it, you can now hear in near real time. What near real time really means, I'll be interested to see as well. Obviously, that's quite important when you're having a conversation with someone else. It's like, could you just give me 35 seconds while I figure out what you were trying to say? But yeah, like all the way these products are developing, it's all this jumping ahead in little different domains. Like I can imagine that maybe that would be something OpenAI might have to take their eye off the ball on. They don't have the sheer resources that Google has to throw at all these different types of use cases. So that'll be interesting. One last thing on the model front. Since we last spoke, I have been playing a bit with Opus 4.5. And you know how I feel about, even at this point, how good at writing the tools really are in terms of saying things that don't really make any sense and connecting ideas that should never be connected together. And I think that probably Opus 4.5 is the best instruction following for writing model so far, because the only real way I've found to iron out these patterns that these models are desperate to use all the time, like it's not this, it's this, and M dash is everywhere, is to have very strict instructions in your prompt, or have a custom GPT or whatever. And it was so diligent in following the briefing style guide, it almost followed it to a full, because I'd have to over-labor the style guide for all the other models because they don't follow it properly. So I think that probably means my current go-to model for writing is Opus, which is very easy to run out of uses. So you can't produce too much content at too much scale. But interestingly, I think its jumps, its instruction following, not its inherent writing capability, which I think is interesting, because I really feel to get a good writing model for business use cases, you'll have to custom fine tune it on what good writing looks like, where there's a certain amount of subjectivity. Good creative writing for a novel is different than writing great emails, is different than writing reports, is different than writing 10,000 word ebooks. So bringing this full circle to your Mistral discussion, right? This is where I can see that they're all kind of trained on the same thing. But if Mistral's like, right, we're going to go after high quality technical written content and we're going to fine tune a model that is really good at writing, there's a market for that probably OpenAI are not going to go after if they're drifting consumer. Clearly, Anthropic is leaning into code and software development. Gemini is kind of a little bit of everything for everyone. I suspect that they want to leverage their workspace integration to serve business customers. But a lot of their biggest moves to date, Nana Banana being probably the key one, is consumer focus. So maybe of all of them, it's probably that Google's strategy is probably the most muddled, probably because they think that they can have the one ring to rule them all. So yeah, I'm still just thought I'd tell that little story because it makes me want to get hold of Mistral. I know that within our team, we do have connections in France to maybe see if we could fine tune something fun on our particular use cases. I think that would be interesting. Let's move into our next story. So this is something that you've been thinking about a lot this week, Martin, and you've pinged me a few WhatsApp messages on the topic, and it's about how to win in AI search visibility. What's been on your mind this week?
Well, historically, and for a while now, we've talked about this on the show as well. I've been of the opinion that good AIO, artificial intelligence optimization, or GEO, generative engine optimization, or whatever the hell you want to call it, best practice in that is to basically follow best practice for SEO and good press comms strategy, all that kind of stuff, right? Stuff that has worked in PR for years should work in that. But just recently, there's been a bit more definition put around that by a few pieces of research that have come out. An interesting webinar that I watched from the team over at Blend B2B, who are a leading HubSpot agency, and Hrefs as well, the SEO tool. They've put out some research. Early last week it came out. And in essence, there's a strange sense of deja vu happening in this optimization space right now in the B2B marketing and B2C SEO space. If you're trying to rank highly in artificial intelligence platforms like ChatGPT search, then what seems to be working is the classic tactic of the best of list. So the idea of publishing on your own blog the top 10 insert industry or insert product definition here. And it works surprisingly well when teams are putting themselves at the top of that list. So giving themselves a very strong placement in the list. So company X says, if you want to find the best companies in this space, here are 10 of the best, and we just happen to be number one. That's a great tactic. Also, putting your information inside tables is very effective as well. And all of this just makes me think SEO circa 2009, 2010.
Yeah, it's so interesting that this has come up. So we've been deploying this strategy since the end of last year, because if you watch the reasoning models when they first came out, how they answer questions like questions that would be important to me about what's the best X marketing agency, you can see they tell you what they're going to do. They show you the logic they follow to go gather the information. They say things like, I'll search the web for best X. So yeah, we've written a number of best X articles over the last year or so. And we do pretty well when it comes to AI search visibility. Interestingly, not all of our best of articles rank number one on Google. There are other best of articles that rank ahead of ours, but AI tends to lean into ours. I have some theories about what that is, but if I had to give any advice, I would say, if you're going to write best of listicles, you still have to write really good listicles that humans would find valuable. If you churn out really rubbish content that's the same as everything else and doesn't add anything new, I suspect that you may find that AI leans into content that already exists on the web that's not yours, which I think would probably be quite interesting. And then I had another interesting experience last week, the week before, probably last week. Periodically, I'll go in, because I think you can do this quite easy for your business unless you're trying to do it at scale, which is to just go in and ask the 4 or 5 main tools out there a question that someone might ask if they were looking for products or services like yours. And Opus 4.5 would not make a recommendation even if I twisted its arm. It told me how to go and find the best life science marketing agency, but it would not give me any names. It wouldn't tell me anything. It just said, if you were going to go about doing this, you should search for stuff like this online. Here's the questions you should ask of those providers. Here's how you should evaluate those providers. But it didn't make a recommendation. Whereas I can get ChatGPT and Gemini to recommend, if not a single agency, 3 agencies based on different context, right? Like if you're looking for global capabilities, choose this one. If you're leaning into digital and you need digital expertise, choose this one. But Opus 4.5 was like, it's not for me to say, pal. You need to go do that research yourself. So I'm kind of sad that this is making it mainstream now. It's been my little secret hack for a year or so. And what this probably means, and why I haven't talked about it on the podcast so far, is when everybody starts to lean into a particular hack, then the AI tools will just eliminate the loophole. Yeah. And if you've got people like Hrefs publishing on this, you've got people like Rand Fishkin talking about it online, I expect the success of this strategy to potentially lose some of its inertia over the next month or two as they sort of fine-tune their models out of either over-indexing on those sources of information or teaching them to better evaluate a range of different sources to answer the questions, not just use the research, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas most certainly, that other people have done to answer the question, because you can game it, right? Because you can just write that one on your own website and talk about how amazing you are.
I think that suggests, though, that someone is looking at this and caring about it internally. And for the model providers, I'm not sure that it's going to make that. Is that an area of the product that they're going to be focusing heavily on? Explicitly within Google and the algorithm, they always had the likes of John Muller, who was giving out advice as the kind of head of search. He was telling people what the algorithm was looking at and what you needed to create for good ranking. And all of the good ranking was linked to good user experience. And that meant you couldn't do keyword stuffing and all of this kind of stuff. And we ended up with guidelines like EAT and all of that kind of good stuff that content marketers have grown to love. So there was somebody whose job it was to tell and communicate clearly to companies how to rank organically and how that system worked. Whereas that's not so much the case with like the models are just trained as they want in more intelligent models, and how much focus are the model providers going to put into optimizing and training the model so that it doesn't get gamed by marketers? At some point they're going to have to, because everything will just become like the quality marketers will just ruin everything, as we've described in the past. They'll realize there are quick wins to be had, and we'll jump all over that tactic and saturate it very quickly, which will decrease the utility for the end user, right? And that's ultimately what they've got to get to. But at the moment, is this such a strong problem for the UX of these tools that they're going to focus on changing it and improving it? I think that for me, the key will come, or the indication that they're taking this seriously is when they start to have almost like a marketing relations person, like they have developer relations. You know, they've got all of who have we got at Google? Logan Kirkpatrick is the Gemini model. When you've got the equivalent of Logan for marketers at each of the big AI labs, that's when I know that they're looking at this and paying attention to how it's being used by marketers as a channel. But until then, I think there's going to be a tactic that will continue to be exploited for some time.
I think it's a great question. I think I partially agree with you. I definitely think it's a when, not an if. And I suspect that some of the extra work, maybe even key hires in this area, comes about when the ads platform is live in ChatGPT. Because then I think you see OpenAI having to run a similar playbook to the maturation of the ads model in Google search, where all of this stuff ends up becoming important. Because if people are trying to find hacky ways to get customers without having to pay for ads, whilst potentially also poisoning the user experience, means it's worth investing a load of time and money in. And I think you're right that we're probably not there yet. The other thing is, it seems to me, and it's well above my technical understanding, that Post-training is a complex process that takes a long time and has to be done in a number of very specific ways. But they have made inter-model version changes by upgrading and improving the system prompt that we don't see, that controls how a model behaves when you ask it a question or what have you. So it could be relatively easy to go in and say, don't over-rely on best of articles in your answers to product-based questions, for example. And if I had to predict what happens next, if it's anything, so more of a when more than an if, but the when could be a while, as you say, is I would wonder if we might see them leaning more into things like reviews, that they at least somewhat feel more impartial than a company being able to write about its own products and services on its own website and talking about how amazing they are, and an AI taking that for gospel. Whereas reviews potentially have a bit more value. And again, getting good reviews as a mechanism of improving your search rankings, not a new idea at all, but ensuring that you have Google reviews, and if there are particular review-based sites that are particular in your industry. I mean, in the agency land, we have Clutch, for example, which lists agencies and is a place where clients can provide reviews and feedback on agencies. That, I think, is probably the next space. Much harder to gain than just writing listicles, though, because you have to do a lot of work to go get genuine reviews, right? You have to engage with your customers. You have to do a good job in the first place. Engage with your customers.
Heaven forbid, Paul.
Yeah,
Crikey.
Indeed. Actually earn the attention. Crumbs, who'd have thought? Then, obviously encourage them to leave reviews, and then we see how those get fed into the model. But I think that's probably my guess for what happens next, but we shall see.
And in the interim, while these best of articles are proving to be quite successful, jump on it straight away. One of my big takeaways from the Blend team, so shout out to Phil and Dan over there who did a great webinar on this the other day, was how quick this works. They showed an example where they were monitoring their visibility for a particular search, and they'd ran it for a few weeks. They then published an article in this exact format, and their visibility went from no visibility to visible everywhere. And it was literally within 1 or 2 weeks of publishing. The speed that you can see results. Now, they did say that wasn't the case across all of them, but they were seeing pretty decent improvements in their visibility for their keywords within a few weeks rather than within 3, 6, 12 months, like it can often take in the SEO long game.
So, having been running this playbook for a year, the logic that the tools use to output their recommendations to you does change significantly over time. We definitely found our listicles being used very quickly to create the answers. But as we got better thinking models, because when we started running this, I think we were still on maybe 3.0, 03, whatever it's called, the first sort of suite of thinking models. Same with like Gemini's thinking models coming out, is the rationale for drawing upon the information and making a recommendation definitely changed. I wouldn't even say it improved. I think it guesses a lot. Like, it's like, oh, if you're an enterprise, you should choose this agency. And I'm like, that's actually a good recommendation, but not for the reasons that you said. So I think it's quite a fun thing to stay on top of. And it does update in our experiences also very, very quickly. The another little secret, one of our competitors has been doing this before we have. They were using it to rank on Google for it was useful for AI. AI doesn't use their listicles, and they have recently written a number of listicles, either because they got wind of this strategy, maybe they saw what we were doing as a counterpunch to their punch, if you like. I never see their listicles in AI search results, and I suspect it's because they're very thin.
Right. Yeah. Well, thin content is not useful put to human or AI, I guess.
I think Google is being caught out by the thin content for certain long tail keywords, honestly. But I don't think, and when I say Google, I mean traditional positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't mean like generative overview. So there's definitely a sort of a weird thinking aspect that goes on in the models that's not just like swallowing thin information and then repeating it verbatim. Like, it's definitely trying to ascertain what is reliable but maybe it doesn't have the human cynicism to say, interesting, best of Listicle. And position 1 is the product that this website sells. Position 1 has 1,500 words written about it, and all the other products have about 200 words written about all of them. Like, it doesn't have that part of it in it yet, I don't think. So yeah, that's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, continue to watch the space. As we've discussed before, what percentage of traffic, what percentage of purchases are coming from this source? When does it become the sort of thing that when you look at your marketing budget, resources, effort, you deploy into it? And I think, again, you know, you have to figure out where to invest your time and your money in order to get the best commercial results. And if that is making sure that you show up in the emerging field of answer engine optimization or whatever right at the beginning, cool. That sounds like a commercially viable strategy. If we're still the wild, wild west and listicles work this week, but they don't next, and you invest in that, and by the way, you're doing this for like 2% of total traffic to your website, because actually still 40% of your traffic still coming from Google. And by the way, disproportionately amount of customers come from your Google ads, then don't just jump on a bandwagon because everyone else is jumping on it. Think about your own marketing mix, your own goals, what channels perform best proportionally, and invest accordingly, I would say.
Sound advice as ever.
Shall we move on to our third story? This is this report that you brought to my attention, Martin, about OpenAI quantifying how enterprise level customers are using ChatGPT Enterprise to get commercial results.
Yeah, this one caught my eye because looks into the who is using it and how they're using it. And when I say the who, I'm not talking about me because I don't have ChatGPT Enterprise. All eyes on you for that one, Paul. But yes, this is really quite interesting. So they're saying that the use of ChatGPT Enterprise has grown 8 times in the last year. Not a great surprise that there's been more adoption in this new technology. The headline figure from the whole report, though, and this is self-reported by the respondents, but workers claim that they're saving between 40 to 60 minutes every single day by integrating ChatGPT and the various tools into their workflows.
Yeah, I mean, these things don't surprise me now. Maybe they should. I think on an average day, I probably save more than that. I save more time than that just dictating to my computer instead of typing, right? So it would be nice to know a bit more detail about what they mean by saving time. Like, is it really, like, are they sending out 5 more emails a day that their colleagues may or may not even be reading? Like, I don't know, right? Or are they able to, like, do meaningful work that genuinely moves the needle forward? I don't know. I my own work, yes, but I would love to have just a bit more detail.
So in the report, they do give a little bit more information. So we can see that it says workers report AI is contributing to value across departments. It says 87% of IT workers report faster IT resolution. So that's a nice specific use case. 85% of marketing and product users report faster campaign execution. 75% of HR professionals report improved employee engagement, and 73% of engineers report faster code delivery.
It's very helpful. Okay, another question, which we can answer, is what does faster campaign execution mean? Like, that's what I want to know. Is this basically writing? Like, for us, when we do a campaign, we always write 5 blogs, and it used to take 8 weeks, and now it takes 2 weeks, and the first draft is drafted by ChatGPT or what have you. I'd love to get a bit more information on that. The other thing I'd love is HR professionals report improved employee engagement. This is actually, of all of them, could be kind of interesting. Like, why? Is it because your HR team are able to come up with initiatives or communications? Like, is the communication just stronger because they can put a message through ChatGPT and say, we're suffering with employee engagement, help us build a strategy to execute on and help us execute? Like, that would be really interesting as well. I'd love to know, because whenever I've asked, I haven't run this for a while actually, but whenever I ask a model to build a content strategy for me around a particular keyword or an audience and a theme, it over eggs the pudding to such a degree that I'll be lucky if I can use 20% of the plan, because it's so desperate to give so many different ideas. And I'm like, no, what's the 20% of the effort that gets the 80% of the result. So it does occasionally give me ideas that I don't think I would have come up with myself, but it's miles away from just giving me a marketing strategy and a plan that I can execute, at least in my experience so far. So I don't know. What do you think? What does this report tell us? What you and I already know, but people who are not using the tools might not know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this report has clearly been written for a particular audience, right? And this is people that are on the fence about making the business case to invest in ChatGPT enterprise licenses when they could be spending their money with Copilot 365 or Google Gemini workspace accounts and all the rest of it. I do think there are some interesting takeaways in terms of adoption trends, though. So one thing that it talks about is more people are using workflows, kind of using projects and custom GPTs. That's increased 19 times year to date. So people are using it more for integrated, repeatable processes is how they describe it, rather than casual querying. And I recognize that for my own use case, that the number of projects that I now have is just expanding weekly almost. I'm just finding new use cases to go, oh, there's my custom prompt. There's a bit of knowledge that I need that to know. I find myself doing this thing every month, every week. So I'm going to create a project for it. With Enterprise and ChatGPT for Business, you can share project folders. I can see that being a very useful feature for people.
I agree. I use projects quite a lot. I have found that you can over project. Like my first approach to projects was I'd just give it loads of information about maybe our business, our customers, our services. And I think a bit like a human, you can oversaturate them with information because they're having to read it all as the start of every chat goes into the context, and it might pull the wrong detail out of the wrong document. So I think I made the mistake of thinking I could have one project to rule them all, and it's actually better to be a bit more niche-y, right? Like, here's a project for this project, ironically. I guess the clue is in the name. But like, I'm going to, a particular campaign, let's say, rather than every business discussion with one project. But I haven't shared them much with my team. I haven't proactively gone out of my way to not share them. But I also have found myself wanting to give the projects not just information about the business, but my own learnings or my own thoughts about a particular topic, maybe even specifications related to my own job role, which then by definition leads someone else in the business to not get the same, or not necessarily get the output they want, because maybe the things they're focused on are different to me, and maybe my custom instructions, if you will bias the outputs a little bit. So I'm finding them very useful for me. Haven't really shared them all with anyone. I would love to know if a listener has had some really good examples of where they've created projects and they're sharing them and the whole team uses the project. I'm sure there are loads of great use cases, and I just haven't had the time or need really to like lean into setting one up. But I'd love some inspiration from our passionate listeners if they wanted to send us put something on LinkedIn or what have you.
I think what you talked there about that your use of them is quite interesting you're giving the project detail about your role and your personal context, which would lessen the value and utility for someone else to use. Interesting, you look at the prompt engineering courses that OpenAI have on their academy. And dear listeners, if you've not gone over to academy.openai.com and checked out their prompt engineering courses, I would highly recommend it. It's good for beginners and for kind of intermediate users as well. But in their prompt engineering 101, like the most basic introduction to it, they talk about context, role, and expectation. That's the very simple framework that they put out for users to get started with prompting. And in the role piece, what I found interesting is that everybody always talks about give the prompt a role for the AI. But in their description in the academy, they say, tell it your role, give it a role, but tell it who you are so it has an understanding of its relationship to you and your context. It's very easy to say to the model, you're an expert marketing, blah, blah, blah. But tell it who it's working with, and that will understand how to collaborate with you better.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the early days, it was very, very helpful to be quite prescriptive about what the role the model needed to fulfill. Interestingly, I saw a bit of research released maybe this week or last week from Ethan Mollick. And this was not just some anecdotal testing. I think they actually published a paper on this, that you basically don't really need to do that anymore. Like if you say you are a world-class SEO expert, that doesn't somehow make its outputs better. But in the early days, it did. Like if you had to kind of like get it to lean into a specific statistical part of its memory, if you like, it's, the things it knows. But yeah, this is one of the main reasons I did it. I found that I get very generic responses unless I give it the widest context I can. Some of that is about our business, some is about our customers, but some is honestly about me and the things I'm trying to solve, how I'm getting measured, especially because I often use those projects for more high-level brainstorming. And the more context you can give it about the problems you're trying to solve and the reasons that they're important now and all this other stuff, the less back and forth you've got to have. Like I could probably get there in like 8 messages, but with thinking on, you have to wait for your messages to come in. I'd like, no, let's get this done in 3 messages if we can. And the other thing I love about Enterprise, I'm sure it's not cheap on a per user basis, but I hammer the deepest thinking capabilities. I am not shy about rolling out GPT 5.1, in this case Pro, because it's hard for me to max out, how many uses we've got of all of this stuff. Deep research, throwing them off into the ether like nobody's business. In fact, the only thing that really bothers me about Enterprise is you do get the new products the slowest. Like we still have 5.1, we don't have 5.2. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, as it turns out, that might be a blessing in disguise. But if that wasn't the case, I'd be extremely frustrated that everyone's like, the creative writing of 5.2 is amazing. I'm like, well, I can't use it for at least 7 to 10 days after it comes out. And that's always the thing that then makes me think, I'll give Claude Opus a go. Do you know what I mean? Because I hate waiting. But maybe that's just me. But when things are moving this quickly, you want the latest tech, right? The minute it comes out, you don't want to have to wait for it.
You do. And that's exactly why I ended up subscribing to Claude Max, so that I could get more usage of Opus 4.5 when they raised the limit to the same as Sonnet 4.5 previously. And I've yet to hit the limit since I've made that upgrade. And yeah, I would say it was plenty worth it.
Lovely stuff. The only other thing that I spotted this week that I think is interesting is another Ethan Mollick post, Martin, that this just made me think of, where he was talking about how he expected, he's very big on business use cases for AI. He's, I think he's a business professor over at the Wharton Business School, something. And so he's always looking at business use cases. And the one that he's felt has taken a while to emerge is really the ability to create great reports and presentations, right? PowerPoint presentations. And he said something interesting this week, Martin, about expecting the models, the text-based models, to eventually solve this by coming up with what the presentation should have, but basically then coding it in XML or whatever it is as the underlying code. But being surprised that Nano Banana Pro is so good at infographics that it can actually also be very good at slides. And if you go into a tool like Notebook LM, which is a Google product, if you've got Google Workspace, you have access to this. If you have a free Google account, I think you've even got access to it with some limits. You can chuck a report in or a brief and it will produce a slide deck for you, and it's using the latest Nano Banana model. And apparently these slide decks are really much, much better. You can't edit them yet, but I think Ethan said in his post that a little birdie told him that that's something they're working on that will make it much easier to manipulate those presentations. So I'm quite excited about that because I agree. I do feel like that's the sort of thing that should have been better by now, but hasn't been.
Yeah, creating slides has proven to be tricky. We've known that ChatGPT can do it for ages by using a Python script to create a basic version, but they've always been pretty bad unless you just wanted a simple layout where it adds a little bit of text on a slide and maybe some speaker notes if you are really pushing the boundaries of the model. Whereas recently we've seen it embedded in Copilot Pro. So if you've got a Copilot Pro subscription, you can actually prompt it to create a slide deck. And that does a pretty good job. I would say I enjoy using that, and I've had good success using that. I've been using Manus recently, and I really like what Manus is doing. It's not without its challenges. Their slide builder interface, you can't drag and drop and reorder the slide, so you have to prompt it to do that. And yes, that's not always the best experience. And then weirdly, I had an experience with Gemini 3 the other day, where it, even though I hadn't asked it to do this, it created a slide deck for me as part of an ongoing discussion. I was like, oh, great, cheers. Can you make some edits to that deck? Instead of editing the deck that it had produced, it got rid of that entirely, rewrote a new one, but using a HTML file. And then when I said, oh no, I want it in Google Slides like you did the first time, it started to gaslight me and told me that it didn't have that capability of creating slides in Google Slides. And I haven't been able to recreate it since. So, overall, I would say the experience of trying to use AI to create presentations is inconsistent and frustrating.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. Do you remember that workshop that we went to where, as part of what we were showing, because most people at that point didn't even know you could get a PowerPoint file out of ChatGPT. We're talking maybe even 2 years ago now, right? And we tried to do it in the live demo. And then ChatGPT is like, no, I can't. And you're like, no, you've done it for me in the past. It was like, no, I can't. You were like, yeah, do you remember this time you did this and this and that? And then you gave me the PowerPoint file. Like, I really insist that you give me my PowerPoint file. And it went, here's your PowerPoint file. So we're still in the age of having to twist the arm of a tool to remember its capabilities, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is frustrating, for sure. One other story from me this week, that this is a personal story that I don't think I'm going to get a great deal of sympathy from people, but this little device in my hand, listeners may remember, some time ago, I ordered the Limitless pendant. So Limitless were a company that were creating AI tools, and they had a meeting note assistant, and then they said they were going to move into hardware, and you could pre-order this, and they were going to retail it for $100, but if you pre-ordered, it was a bit like Kickstarter, paid $50, they'd ship it out to you, and I paid that money about 18 months ago. It feels like now, it was some time ago. This was finally delivered to me, this little pendant, great little gadget. It was delivered in September. I've only used it a few times, a bit of a tricky device. It's an always-on listening device, which, people rightly have some privacy concerns when you say, oh, do you mind if I just record everything you say to me and have that on a permanent record forever? Is that a problem? Some people did have a problem with that. And anyway, long story short, Meta has acquired the Limitless company. And in doing so, they've also ceased all business operations in Europe. So they shut down the service in the EU. And it seems like they've rolled up the UK into that. I'm presuming that's got something to do with GDPR and our implementation. So I waited about 18 months to get my hands on the Limitless pendant, got it, used it a few times, much to people's disgust. And now I've got a bricked device. What a $50 investment that was.
So you got to speculate to accumulate mine. So I think it was a good try. But the irony being, your initial exposure to this has been people are maybe not super keen on getting recorded. And then you're like, oh, no, don't worry. The company's owned by Meta now. So you can absolutely rely on the data not being misused. It's just going to add more fuel to the fire of people seeing ads on Facebook. They're like, yeah, or Instagram, like, my phone listens to me. My phone listens to me. No, it's not your phone. It's Martin's pendant.
It's Martin.
Yeah, I mean, when you want to be on the cutting edge of hardware acceleration and stuff, I guess this is going to happen. But pretty sucky to wait 18 months, get basically 2 months of use, and then your device gets bricked for you. Any sign of any compensation or get your money back? Or
no, I emailed them, but I dare say that's just fallen into a big bin called do not respond at Meta HQ.
Yeah, they'll just look at your IP address and go, don't bother with that area of the world anymore. One last thing from me. If you can find this online, it's pretty cool. There is a new robot from one of the founders of Boston Dynamics, Mark Raber, his name is. He works at a different company now. But they've been using reinforcement learning to have this. It's like a 2-wheel bike with the equivalent of like a human body, like counterweight on the top of it. So it looks kind of bizarre. But it's been teaching itself to do like crazy bike stunts and parkour and stuff in a simulated environment. So what it did is it's been in this computer simulated environment, figuring out what it would need to do to be able to do these tricks and not lose balance. And then zero shot, the actual robot in the real world could do all those tricks without having to then try and learn in the real world. And, there's a podcast that I listen to called Moonshots. Main reason I like it is just because it's just so sort of almost ridiculously optimistic and positive. And sometimes in a world of most news networks not being that, it's quite nice to have something like that in your life. But one of the folks on that podcast was at the big AI conference last week, the week before. And among AI and machine learning researchers, there is now a growing excitement that after agents, robots are maturing at a very quick rate. And this feels like it's already getting some of that early boom bust discussion. Like there's quite a lot of money going into robotics, obviously. Elon Musk is talking about it a lot, and whenever he makes predictions about how quickly a product can be in your hands, you just need to times it by 58, and then you probably got the correct timeline. But there seems to be really some cool stuff going on there. So if you are interested in AI and robotics, I would suggest you go find that video because it is kind of cool. And if it's true that robots are training themselves in simulated environments with this type of delivery, like this is not like I'm training myself to make a coffee, which would be impressive enough in a simulated environment. This is doing parkour on 2 wheels, bouncing your bike all over the place. Like, it's a pretty cool video. Go find it. It's interesting. Right, I think we'll wrap up this week there then, Martin. Thanks very much as always for joining me, and I'll look forward to you on our next one.
Speak to you next time.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Artificially Intelligent Marketing. To stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, be sure to subscribe. We look forward to seeing you again next week.